This is part 2 of the Approaching Storm series, proposing a path back to prosperity. The threat posed by the current financial crisis to our national security is worse than any war this country has ever fought, yet the country hasn't mobilized to do anything about it. The problems we're facing can't be solved on a business-as-usual peacetime footing. This is a major worldwide crisis that could easily dwarf World War II, a time when women left their homes to work in factories producing planes and tanks, while tens of millions of men mobilized and marched off to die in order to check the spread of a malignancy. With deregulation, Wall Street greed has become an aggressive cancer, and worse, in order to expand Wall Street's speculative base, we exported that malignancy to global markets, putting the entire world economy at risk. It's time to fully mobilize our nation to put Wall Street in check and make the world financially safe again. Our first action needs to be campaign reform, getting rid of PACs which came into existence after a misguided court decision and subsequent deregulation. We need to untether Congress from the campaign contributions made by special interests on Wall Street that work against public interests. Until we do, PACs will continue to own Congress, and the rape and pillage of our economy will continue until there's nothing left. Wall Street has become a financial tyrant, and we're just its oppressed subjects. This is no longer the American dream. It's become the American nightmare. While actions are being taken to re-regulate financial markets, curtailing program trading and derivative speculation, America needs to embark on a 4-year austerity program to completely eliminate our sovereign debt. It can be done, so let's do it. The current tax code is so distorted from special interest provisions that it can't be fixed. It needs to be thrown out entirely. A simple tax code that every taxpayer can understand needs to be enacted, with all citizens and all businesses paying their fair share. Deficit spending allows a lot of bad behavior, poor judgment, and poor decision-making on the part of our elected officials. Making balanced budgets a constitutional requirement would go a long way toward funding important social programs like Social Security and Medicare, which define any modern society. As an example, projected spending for 2012 on Social Security is $2.7 trillion. Projections for interest on our national debt and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are $1.4 and $1.3 trillion respectively. Just eliminating the debt interest and bringing our troops home would pay for the entire Social Security program. Why can't our Congress make those simple decisions? They're not doing their jobs. There's so much pork that gets into the current budgets, what I call grandfathered spending, also earmarks, that once in seems to ride along forever unchallenged. I think it's important that all budgets get zero-based periodically, if not annually, at least on a 3 to 5 year cycle, where everything gets dumped out and has to be rejustified. Old age security and national health care should not be up for debate. They're what define any modern society that gives a damn for their citizens. We live in a time when any government that neglects these items does so at its own peril. Putting a tourniquet on deficit spending and a war that's become a financial abscess would make paying for these items a non-issue. Taking health care out of the Wall Street arena, where it's just a gambling prop, and creating a national mindset that we're going to make the health care system work for everyone, like going to the moon in the 1960s, will be a proud day for all Americans. We've made socialized medicine work successfully for millions of men and women and their families for generations now. No, I'm not talking about Medicare or Medicaid. I'm talking about the U.S. military. So if we can do it for them, why can't we do it for all Americans? Capital should not be free, and credit should not be free. At the same time, it should not be usurious either. There were valid reasons for the interest rate controls that existed throughout most of our 250-year history as a nation, and we need to bring back those controls. thoughtfully and decisively. The reasons for allowing our currency to be devalued during the Bush years were extremely misguided and short-sighted. If the U.S. wants a strong standing among the major nations of the 21st century, we must have a strong currency that world financial markets can depend upon for stability. It needs to be rock solid. Something has happened to our American society over the past 50 years. We were once a nation of self-sufficient pioneers who had band together in time of need to help one another. 100 years ago, if a major storm devastated a town, neighbors would be out with their axes and shovels, clearing their own streets and helping those less fortunate. Today, they just sit on their rubble piles, bemoaning the non-responsiveness of government, unable or unwilling to help themselves or one another. It's worth examining some of the high points of the 20th century, the Roaring Twenties, and the unparalleled prosperity and optimism of the 1950s. What was so different about those generations of Americans? Simple. It was World War I and World War II. They'd experienced the mobilization of an entire nation around a common cause. Tens of millions of men went through the same boot camp as a socializing sink point and spent 2 to 4 years in austere conditions looking out for one another. Women took up the slack in the nation's factories and workshops, and it affected those generations of Americans for a lifetime. We've had other wars before or since, like Vietnam and Iraq, but those wars were conducted on a peacetime footing and didn't serve to resocialize an entire nation. So, short of having another world war, how might we achieve those same social effects? One way to mobilize our nation and achieve the desired effect would be mandatory national service, putting all Americans back to work. Every citizen between the ages of 16 and 28 should have a minimum 2-year active duty obligation to their nation, either at the federal or state level. The 12-year window would allow individual flexibility for education or family pursuits, but at some point, all citizens must complete their national service. As a major socialization sink point around civic duty, all would go through the same basic training, then on to develop more advanced skills, becoming useful members of society, just like those millions of men and women that pulled this nation through World War I and World War II. We should use the U.S. military as a template for mobilization and subsequent national service. It has the cadre of career officers and NCOs who know how to do the training and effectively run large organizations that include hospitals, schools, law enforcement, and jurisprudence, everything needed for daily life while getting major missions accomplished. This would also provide an opportunity for the vast numbers of experienced workers over the age of 50 who have been sidelined by the current jobless crisis to come back into the system, providing the additional experience and leadership needed to make the program successful. The obligation could be fulfilled in many ways: military service, foreign service, in healthcare or education, to name a few, or in partnership programs with industry to reindustrialize the nation and fix our decaying infrastructure. Every citizen would be required to contribute in some meaningful way to rebuilding our nation and projecting its strength into the future. The experience will make all Americans more accountable, bringing back that self-reliant, pioneering culture we once had. This concludes part 2 of the series. More videos will follow, one on the evolution of capitalism in the 21st century, another on the role of CEOs and boards in causing the current jobs crisis and what they will need to do before there can ever be a recovery. There's also one on short selling and how speculators with deep pockets use the practice to crush companies, killing even more jobs. To learn more about the movement or to become involved in the solutions, please visit our website at www.rootcausemovement.com. Thanks for your engagement.